can't stop thinking about it. The teaser for the Harry Potter series. Hey Wizards, how's it going? It's been 1 month since the Harry Potter series teaser released, and there hasn't been a single day without some fun since it came out that I haven't hit play to watch it. Whether it's to make content or just because I wanted to watch it. Sometimes my daughter asks to watch it in such a cute way, saying, "Daddy, I want to see Ron do this." It's so adorable I can't resist and end up watching it 5,000 times. And then, one of those times I was watching, I thought, what if I compare the scenes from the teaser with the specific moments from the book? And here we are. That's exactly what I'm going to do. If you enjoy the videos here on Calderon Ferrado, leave your like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you stay up to date with everything. You can become a member of the channel, and you can contribute through the thanks button. That way, your comment will stand out among the others. Or you can send your question about the Harry Potter universe through the link in the description, or by using the QR code. In all these ways, you help support the channel. The opening scene shows Walter reading the newspaper in the kitchen. As we already know, this moment takes place on Dudley's birthday when they go to the zoo. That's because we've already seen images of these scenes being filmed. These were basically the first images that leaked from the filming of Harry Potter. And Walter is wearing exactly the same shirt that he is in the teaser. And this moment seems to correspond exactly to this part of the book. Uncle Walter came into the kitchen when Harry was turning the bacon. "Combed your hair," he said as a way of saying good morning.
About once a week, Uncle Walter would peek over his newspaper and shout that Harry needed a haircut.
And then, let's go a little further down, and there's this passage. Harry put the plates of eggs and bacon on the table, which was difficult because there wasn't much space. Meanwhile, Dudley was counting the presents. So, I imagine that this whole scene is Walter coming into the kitchen while Harry is there taking care of the bacon and eggs. And he simply opens the newspaper and tells him to comb his hair. And it's exactly on Duda's birthday, because, you know, he can't find space to put the eggs and bacon on the table, since Duda was counting the presents. The next scene in the teaser shows Harry being violently thrown into the cupboard under the stairs. And the part that matches this moment seems to be this one right here. Uncle Walter waited until Pedro was far from the house to argue with Harry. He was so angry that he could barely speak. He could only say, "Go cupboard, Harry, no food," before collapsing into a chair, and Aunt Petunia had to run to serve him a good dose of brandy. The book doesn't make it clear that Uncle Walter or Aunt Petunia pushed Harry into the cupboard with that kind of violence, right? I believe that's actually an adaptation from the series, just like the movies did, right? By showing them pushing Harry in there, because it adds more depth to the moment and shows how cruel the Dursleys were to Harry. In this part of the book, it only says that Walter could barely speak because he was so nervous. We'll only find out if this scene of him being thrown into the cupboard really happens after the incident at the zoo, or if it's some other moment. But I believe it is, because Harry is also wearing the same clothes from that day. Now, this next scene shows Harry running through the Muggle school and being ambushed by Duda. And also, on the day the teaser was released, some photos came out, right? A few photos were released, and one of those photos is of Duda there at the school, in the outdoor area. At the school, with his friends looking in one direction. And these moments correspond to these passages from the book. Duda's favorite punching bag was Harry. But Duda couldn't always catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Pedro was a skinny boy with a rat-like face.
Usually, he was the one who held the boys' arms behind their backs while Duda hit them. Duda's gang was chasing him as always. And much to the surprise of both Harry and the others, he appeared sitting on the chimney.
The first passage I included from the book talks about Harry being Duda's favorite punching bag. But he was fast, really fast, and Duda couldn't always catch him. Then there's the part where he's running. The second passage talks about Pedro, who was usually the friend who held Harry's arms behind his back. But here, it's not Pedro who's holding Harry. Pedro is next to Duda in this scene. The two who are holding Harry could be either Malcolm, Gordon, or Dennis. At least two of them are among those three. In this scene from the series, I believe we're going to see the following. Harry being cornered in the bathroom, managing to escape, running, and heading out to the school grounds. And then, when he thinks he finally got away, he'll be caught by Duda and his friends. And then, he'll end up in the chimney, right? In a burst of magic, which he didn't even know he was doing, didn't even know what had happened. So, you see that the scene visually sets up some parts that the book describes. In other words, Harry running, because Duda couldn't always catch him being held to be used as a punching bag, and that moment of him ending up in the chimney, I think that'll be in the full scene. And then, in the next scene of the teaser, we have that really intense moment of Petunia cutting Harry's hair, right? She even says that Harry wasn't special at all, that he was just a normal boy. And she points the scissors at his face, right? It's a pretty intense scene. And this moment comes from this part here.
Once, Aunt Petunia, tired of seeing Harry come back from the barber as if he hadn't been there at all, grabbed a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short that he was almost bald.
Except for a fringe, which she left to hide that horrible scar. Man, in the series, how do I think they're going to set this up?
You can see that Harry is wearing his school uniform, right? The Muggle school uniform. In this scene where she's cutting his hair, I think the Dursleys are going to be called to the school, right? Because Harry just ended up in the chimney there.
And he was punished for that. He was grounded for a long time because of it. He just didn't know how to explain it, but he was punished.
So I imagine that Petunia must have been really angry for getting that complaint, right? And went to pick up Harry and Dudley at school. And then she just showed up angry at him, upset, and cut his hair. So they kind of put it all together to show that, you know? I think one event is going to follow the other. She'll get mad at Harry there for picking him up at school, for being called to the school, and then she's going to cut his hair right after that because he's wearing the uniform, and I believe that's how it's going to happen. This is going to be a way for the series to show the events, because if you notice, in the book, we're not actually seeing these things happen. They're being told there in a past tense way, like Harry is, right? The book is from his point of view, and then the narrator is saying, well, once Harry was punished because he ended up in the chimney, another time he was punished because his hair grew, and he couldn't explain how. So, the series is going to show that happening. And then, to keep these things going, you know, to put a timeline there, they're going to show it happening kind of sequentially. That's what I believe, okay? We'll only really know when we watch the series. And then, while these scenes are happening, Petunia says that Harry wasn't special at all, that he was going to behave like a normal boy. But this line isn't in the book. It's not in the book at any point. It's something the series created. And for me, the teaser showed that Petunia is going to be much more of a tyrant than Walter himself, you know?
Of course, we're going to have some moments with Walter, but I think Petunia is going to be, let's say, much more cruel to Harry.
Which makes sense since the connection is directly with her, right? Then there's the scene where Harry picks up the letters, and then he goes through them one by one until he finds the one addressed to him, to his surprise, and he keeps looking at it. And this scene matches this exact part of the book. There were 3 things on the doormat. A postcard from Uncle Walter's sister, Gita, who was spending her vacation on the Isle of Wight, a brown envelope that looked like a bill, and a letter for Harry.
Harry picked it up and stared at it, his heart thumping like a giant rubber band. No one had ever written to him in his whole life. Who would write to him?
He had no friends, nor any other relatives.
He wasn't a member of the library, so he had never even received the rude notes asking for books to be returned.
Yet, there was a letter addressed so clearly that there could be no mistake. Mr. Harry Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The envelope was thick and heavy, made of yellowed parchment and addressed in emerald green ink. There was no stamp. Man, in the teaser, the scene is exactly like this. The whole description of the scene is exactly like this. Even the brown envelope, like, it's there in the scene, you know? Then, we have the scene with Harry and Hagrid on the subway. And then, Hagrid says, right, that he always wanted to know more about his parents. And then, Hagrid says that they were the kindest people he had ever known. That they were funny, smart, and fought for what they believed was right. This specific line from Hagrid isn't in the book either. I mean, there's something similar, but not like this. When he talks about Harry's parents, they're not on the subway. They're still there in the hut, on the rock. And he does actually get emotional while he's talking. In the teaser, he seems like he's just there, you know, he speaks kindly and all. But in the book, He gets emotional while talking.
Now, we don't know if this line from Harry asking about his parents is exactly in the subway, or if it's at some other moment.
Because they only put the audio there, right? It's just the audio that we have. We don't see Harry speaking. Hagrid either. The part where he says they were smart and kind, there he's really in the subway. But I don't know if the whole line is really from that moment. Maybe not. Even so, the scene isn't completely made up. There are parts where they're actually on the subway, but they talk about the supply list, and the part goes something like this. On the train, people stared even more. Hagrid took up 2 seats and started knitting something canary yellow that looked like a circus tent. And really, we can see that Hagrid is knitting there. You can see a knitting needle in his hand. You just can't really see what he's knitting. And then, at this moment in the book, they talk about the supply list anyway. Hagrid really is there taking up both seats. But the people on the train aren't really looking at them. I don't know if at that moment they had already stopped looking, but at that moment in the teaser, they're not looking. And then, still in the sequence of that scene, there's Harry touching his forehead, right on the scar. In the book, there's no moment where this is described in the subway, there, while they're in the subway. So, probably, Hagrid says something there that makes him touch the scar. Maybe even Hagrid telling what caused that scar, which, right, was Voldemort attacking him. Harry and Hagrid go up the station stairs towards the street, and in the book, the passage is this. I don't know how muggles manage without magic, he said as they went up a worn-out escalator that led to a busy street, with shops on both sides. Well, the small difference here is that it's not an escalator in the series, right? It's just a regular staircase. And also, we don't know if Hagrid is actually going to say that at this moment, right? We can see that he says something, because he pulls Harry closer. He jokes around, messing up Harry's hair in some way. So maybe he does say something, but I'm not sure if it's in this context.
Now, in the next scene, there's Hagrid's voice, right, as a voiceover, where he says, "Our next meeting will be at Hogwarts," and Harry is there at King's Cross, right.
But the scene and the line aren't from the same moment. That line is probably from the moment when Hagrid is putting Harry back on the subway to go to the Dursleys' house.
Because the ones who take Harry to King's Cross on September 1st are the Dursleys. But there's a part in the book where Hagrid says something very similar. And it's at this moment right here. Look.
Hagrid helped Harry get on the train that would take him back to the Dursleys. Then he handed him an envelope. Your ticket to Hogwarts, September 1st at King's Cross Station. It's all on the ticket. If you have any trouble with the Dursleys, send me a letter with the owl. She'll know where to find me. See you soon, Harry. So he doesn't say it like in the series, right? Our next meeting will be at Hogwarts. But he says, see you soon, Harry. And it's probably from this same moment. Now, this scene where Hagrid speaks, shows Harry looking kind of confused there at King's Cross. Not knowing where to go, kind of lost, looking around. And it comes from this exact part of the book. Harry did everything he could not to panic.
By the big clock above the board announcing the arriving trains, he only had 10 minutes left to board the Hogwarts train.
And he had no idea how he was going to do that. He was lost in the middle of the station, with a suitcase he could barely lift, his pocket full of wizard money, and a big owl. This is exactly that moment. What happens just before he sees the Weasley family and gets the information? And then, in the next scene, we have Harry running. Right. He's there with the cart, running. And because Ginny is there in the corner, this is the moment that happens right after Mrs. Weasley explains to him how to get to platform 9 3/4, which is this part here.
And Harry turned the cart and faced the barrier. It looked very solid. He started walking toward it.
People on their way to platforms 9 and 10 were pushing him.
Harry quickened his pace. He was about to run straight into the ticket collector. Then he would get into trouble. Bending over the cart, he broke into a run. The barrier was getting closer and closer. He couldn't stop. The cart was out of control. He was just a step away. He closed his eyes, bracing for the collision, and it didn't happen. It's exactly this moment. Exactly this moment.
Now, the next scene, my friends, which is one of the scenes that really makes my heart ache in this teaser, is Harry looking out the window of the Hogwarts Express and seeing Molly hugging Ron there. It's a really powerful scene.
And it matches exactly this part here. Harry sat by the window where, half hidden, he could watch the red-haired family on the platform and listen to what they were saying. A little before that moment, Molly had tried to wipe Ron's nose. She pulls out a handkerchief and tries to clean his nose. And we already know that's going to happen because in the leaked scenes from the filming at platform 9 3/4 in the photos, Molly really does have a handkerchief in her hand.
And we already know, right? Francesca Gardner herself said that we're going to find out the reason behind the mark on Ron's nose, what it is. So, that's going to happen.
The next scene shows the Hogwarts Express arriving at the Hogsmeade platform, and Hagrid is there, waiting for the students. He's holding his little lantern. And this scene came exactly from this part. The train slowed down and finally stopped. People pushed each other to get to the door and step onto the small, dark platform. Harry shivered in the cold night air. Then, a lamp appeared swinging above the students' heads, and Harry heard a familiar voice. That's exactly the part. Next, we have Hagrid leading the students through the trees, where obviously, they are heading towards the little boats to cross the Black Lake and get to Hogwarts. And this comes from this part here. Come on, follow me. Anyone else from first year? Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid along a path that looked steep and narrow.
It was so dark around that Harry thought he must be seeing big trees there.
No one talked much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffled a couple of times. You'll get your first look at Hogwarts in a second, Hagrid shouted over his shoulder. Just after this bend, so it's likely that on this path the students get their first reveal of the castle there, early on in the series. After that, Hagrid knocks on the door of Hogwarts. And this is exactly the part. They climbed a stone staircase and gathered around the huge oak door. Is everyone here? You there? Do you still have your toad? Hagrid raised his giant fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. By the way, in the teaser, he knocks twice, right? Because it matches the beat of the soundtrack, which I thought was really cool. But in the scene, he'll likely knock 3 times anyway. If it's only twice, it doesn't really matter. The key is, he knocks on the door. In the next scene, the doors open, and the students start entering the entrance hall of Hogwarts. Minerva is there waiting for them. And this scene comes from this part here. The door suddenly swung open, and a tall witch appeared, with black hair and emerald green robes. She had a very stern face.
And Harry's first thought was that she was someone you didn't want to annoy. First-year students, Professor Minerva McGonagall, Hagrid announced. Thank you, Hagrid.
I'll take care of them from here. She flung the door wide open. The hall was so large that the entire Dursley house could have fit inside. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches, like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to see, and an impressive marble staircase in front led to the upper floors, just like it is in the scene. The only difference is that Minerva opens the door there, right? In this scene, she's there waiting for them, right? A few steps up on the staircase. Then, this next scene shows someone picking up the sorting hat from the stool to put it on their head, and I believe it's Harry, right? And it comes from this part here, although it doesn't describe Harry picking up the hat and putting it on his head, right? There's this moment here in the book. When I call your names, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted. Anna Abbott, a girl with a rosy face and blonde pigtails, stumbled out of the line and put on the hat, which sank straight down to her eyes, and sat down. So, we see that the students go, take the hat, and put it on their heads, right? So everyone does this. Absolutely everyone, all of them. And Harry does it too. While it doesn't mention Harry taking the hat from the stool and putting it on, that's what happens. Then, we have a scene with Harry, Ron, and Hermione walking among the students, and we see students passing by and looking at Harry, kind of as if they're talking about him. And this comes from this part here. Look, the whispers followed Harry from the moment he left the dormitory the next day. The kids lining up outside the classrooms would stand on tiptoe to get a look, or they would walk back and forth in the hallways to see him twice. Harry wished they wouldn't do that, because he was trying to concentrate on finding his way to his classes. That is, at this moment. Then we have Ollivander telling Harry that they could expect great things. The exact phrase is, Mr. Potter, I think we can expect great things from you, which comes from this passage here in the book. It's really curious how these things happen. The wand chooses the wizard, remember? I think we can expect great things from you, Mr. Potter.
After all, he who must not be named accomplished great things.
Terrible, yes, but great. Exactly the same. And then, after that, we have the students in a class there, right? Which is the History of Magic class. We can see, in a quick flash, just for a moment, Professor Binns in front of the blackboard, who is the ghost teacher, and then we see some students sleeping there, right too. The scene has two shots, right? We see some students sleeping there, and this matches this part here.
No doubt the most boring class was History of Magic, the only subject taught by a ghost.
Professor Binns was already very old when he fell asleep in front of the fireplace in the staff room and got up the next morning to teach, leaving his body behind. Binns talked non-stop while they wrote down names and dates and ended up confusing Emmerich the Evil with Uric the Oddball. That's interesting because in the book, they don't describe the classes. Only a few classes are described, like Transfiguration, Potions, what they're doing there. But some other classes, like History of Magic, have this very brief description. And then, we'll see, right, in the series, them having these classes. So the content for these classes was created. It was added there. We'll see that, so it's really cool. At this point in the book, it doesn't say that anyone is sleeping, but later we get this information, that the students really do sleep in History of Magic class. The next scene shows Harry entering the Gryffindor common room for the first time, and then, after it shows him from behind, it shows the common room in an aerial shot, kind of spinning, and it comes from this part here. "Dragon's head," said Percy, and the portrait leaned forward, revealing a round hole in the wall. Everyone went through the hole. Neville needed a boost. They found themselves in the Gryffindor common room, a round room full of armchairs, soft armchairs. And really, if you notice, the room is actually round, and when it's shown from above, you can see there are lots of armchairs. There are even several students sitting, which is what the common room is really like. But I found it interesting that even the room is round, just as it's described in the book. Then, we have a scene where Draco draws his wand, right? He's with Crabbe, Goyle, and Pansy Parkinson. But they don't point their wands at anyone. They just draw their wands with a kind of mocking expression. Even though it's a really quick scene, I believe it's referring to this moment here from the book. "You're a lot braver now that you're back on the ground and with your little friends," said Harry calmly. There was nothing little about Crabbe or Goyle, but since the main table was full of teachers, the boys could only crack their knuckles and make angry faces. "I'll take you on any time alone," said Draco. "Tonight, if you want. Wizard's duel, just wands, no contact." "What? Never heard of a wizard's duel, I suppose." So, I think this scene here is the moment when Draco is talking about this wizard's duel, and he pulls out his wand just to say, "Wizard's duel, just wands, no contact." I think it's this moment. Unlike in the book, right? Pansy Parkinson isn't there. But we're going to see a lot of these students who are classmates, who are in the same year as Harry, showing up at various moments. We'll have another example later in the teaser, which I'll talk about. In the next scene, Harry and Ron are opening the Nimbus 2000 package very excited, and it comes from this part here. Harry had a lot of trouble concentrating in class that day. His thoughts kept wandering to the dormitory where he kept the broomstick under his bed, or drifting off to the Quidditch field where he would learn to play. He ate dinner quickly that night, without even noticing what he was eating, and then ran up to the room with Ron to finally unwrap the Nimbus 2000. And this moment, when they're unwrapping it, is exactly that moment. The next scene in the teaser shows the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff players entering the field in the stadium, right? For the game. And they're entering there, amid the thunderous applause in the stands. And Snape comes right behind Harry. And this scene comes from this part of the book.
Maybe that's why Snape had such an angry look on his face when the teams entered the field. That's something Ron noticed too. So, they're entering the field.
There's also this thing about the noise, the crowd shouting. That's just a little before. And then, Snape looking annoyed. Snape is right behind Harry. So, that's probably the moment. Obviously, the series uses creative freedom there to, make the scene the way they think is best, telling that story. In the book, it doesn't literally describe how the players come in. But there was all this noise, And then in the series, they did it this way. Ron and Hermione show up cheering in the stands. And this game against Hufflepuff ends really quickly. Harry catches the snitch in 5 minutes, And then, this moment might come from a part of the book where a lot happens in the scene, But it's not being shown in the teaser. But in the part from the book, there's this. Harry, unexpectedly, made a spectacular dive that caused cheers and shouts from the crowd. Hermione stood, fingers over her mouth, as Harry flew to the ground like a bullet. In the teaser, Hermione doesn't have her fingers over her mouth, right? But she's clearly celebrating there at the moment when Harry must have made some move. That's probably it.
And since Ron is next to her, I don't know if in the teaser this scene of them celebrating is the moment when Harry catches the snitch, because Ron doesn't see Harry catching the snitch.
Because in this case, he was fighting with Draco Malfoy. He and Neville were fighting there with Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle, because they had offended them there in the stands. So he doesn't even see Harry catching the snitch. So it's at some moment when Harry makes some play, or does something really worth celebrating. And then, everyone was freaking out there in the stands. Unless this fight doesn't happen in the stands. Unless in the series they don't include it, for some reason. And then, this moment is Ron celebrating with Hermione that Harry caught the snitch. But I think this fight will happen, yes. The first-year students appear in herbology class wearing yellow protective clothing, and this scene doesn't portray any specific moment from the book, because the herbology class is mentioned in a very superficial way there, right? It's only said that they have 3 herbology classes a week, and that they study various types of magical plants. And later, Hermione mentions at the end, right, about herbology, that she learned about Devil's Snare in herbology, anyway. And here's the passage that says that.
3 times a week, they went to the greenhouses behind the castle to study herbology with a short, plump witch named Professor Sprout. With her, they learned to care for strange plants and fungi and discovered their uses. It's not a specific class, but in the series, as I mentioned, they will create one.
It's going to be really cool, by the way, to see Hermione studying. Hermione and the trio, you know, in this case, having a class about Devil's Snare. Harry and Ron not paying attention, just talking there.
And Hermione paying attention so she can use that later on in the Devil's Snare challenge. Harry and Ron are shown running on top of the table in the Great Hall. And that's not from any scene, right?
It just says that they had a lot of fun in the empty castle during Christmas break, but it doesn't mention them running on top of the table specifically. So, in the book, there's no specific passage that matches this scene. Then, it goes to a scene of Harry and Ron throwing candy at each other on the Hogwarts Express. And Ron is holding a box of chocolate frogs. You can see that. So, this moment seems to come after this part here in the book. Want to give me a frog? Maybe I'll get the witch. Thanks. No, I got Morgana again. I already have about 6. Do you want it? You can start collecting. Ron's eyes drifted to a pile of chocolate frogs that were still unopened. Help yourself, said Harry. In the series, it looks like they're going to show Harry and Ron having fun there, developing their friendship there. You know, the beginning of a very strong friendship. So, since Ron has a box of chocolate frogs, it seems to come after that part where he had already asked for one to see the card, right? But he was more interested in eating the chocolates. Maybe Harry notices that and jokes around with him. They start to play, to mess around. Or maybe it's at the moment when the frog jumps. Anyway, the series will have the creative freedom to do that. Afterwards, we have a scene where Harry is with Ron, as well as Hannah Abbott and Ernest Macmillan throwing snowballs. In the book, in this part, Harry is with the Weasleys. Hannah Abbott and Ernest Macmillan are not in the scene. But it's just like the case with Pansy. These students will appear a little more than they actually do in the book. That moment seems to correspond to this part right here. Look.
Harry and the Weasleys spent a very happy afternoon engaged in a furious snowball fight. Then, we have Hagrid making a snow angel, right there on the ground.
But there's nothing about that in the book. Really nothing. Maybe it's after he brings the Christmas tree to the Great Hall. At some point, or maybe even during the snowball fight itself. I don't know. But really, there's no moment in the book that describes this. The next scene shows the Gryffindor Quidditch team in the locker room. For the first time, it shows them in the locker room there, right? In the movie, it only shows them kind of getting focused before they get there, right? Before entering the field, but in the series, it will show them in the locker room. And then, they put their hands together, give a kind of cheer and all. And I believe this game isn't against Hufflepuff. Maybe it's Harry's first game, against Slytherin, and it comes from this part here. Oliver Wood called for silence. All right, boys. And girls, added the chaser Angelina Johnson. And girls, agreed Oliver. It's time. The big game, said Fred. The big game we've been waiting for, explained George.
We already know Oliver's pep talk by heart, Fred commented to Harry. We were on the team last year. Shut up, you two, ordered Oliver.
This is the best team Gryffindor has had in years. We're going to win. I know we will. And he looked at the players as if to say, or else. All right, it's time. Good luck to everyone. I believe this is the moment, right after the speech, when they put their hands together, and bam, they go to the game. In the series, maybe this is the most excited speech. right there, like, to really show how competitive Oliver Wood was. Then, we have a scene with Harry and Ron eating marshmallows by the fireplace, and this seems to be in the Gryffindor common room. And this scene comes from this exact part. Once started.
During the holidays, Ron and Harry were having too much fun to remember Flamel. They had the dormitory all to themselves, and the common room was much emptier than usual.
That's why they could use the comfortable armchairs by the fireplace. They would sit down all the time to eat anything they could stick on a roasting fork. Bread, cakes, marshmallows, and they plotted ways to get Draco expelled. They had fun discussing it, even if it wouldn't lead to anything. So here, they're eating marshmallows. This refers to the passage about moments, not just one, but several days during the holidays mentioned in the passage, and the series shows some of those moments with them in front of the fireplace, eating marshmallows. The next scene shows Snape with his wand, the wand lit, right? We're seeing the scene from Harry's perspective.
Harry is under the invisibility cloak, and this comes from this passage here, look. It seems to come exactly from this passage. You asked me to come straight to you, Professor.
If someone was wandering around at night, and someone was in the library, in the restricted section, Harry felt the blood drain from his face. Wherever he was, Filch must have known a shortcut, because his low, oily voice was getting closer. And to his horror, it was Snape who answered. The restricted section? Well, they can't be far. Let's catch them. Harry stood still where he was when Filch and Snape turned the corner of the hallway ahead. They couldn't see him, of course, but it was a narrow corridor.
And if they got any closer, they'd bump into him. The cloak didn't stop him from being solid. So, it seems like this is the moment when Snape and Filch end up searching around there.
Because there was someone out of bed, and it was Harry, and they get really close to him. You can even see it, right? It was a narrow corridor.
And then, in the scene, we have Harry's point of view under the cloak, and Snape is really close to him, right? So, it's this moment here. The next scene shows Dumbledore with what really looks like a tuning fork. Man, but this scene is completely made up for the series. There's nothing like this in the book. And it could be a moment where Dumbledore is investigating something related to the Sorcerer's Stone.
Or at Flamel's house, I don't know, because we know there will be these moments in the series, right? And then, the next scene shows Hermione sitting there in the Hogwarts Express compartment.
The compartment where Harry and Ron were sitting, right? And this matches this part here. Look. He had just raised his wand when the compartment door opened again. The boy without the toad was back. But this time he was accompanied by a girl. She was already wearing her new Hogwarts robes. Has anyone seen a toad? Neville lost his.
She had a bossy tone of voice. Her brown hair was very bushy, and her front teeth were a bit large. We've already told him we haven't seen the toad, Ron replied. But the girl wasn't listening. She was looking at the wand in his hand. Are you doing magic? I want to see. She sat down. Ron looked embarrassed.
And if you notice in this scene, Hermione sits down, and Ron really is a bit embarrassed. He's holding the wand in his hand, and he's kind of looking the other way, you know? He's embarrassed when she sits there in the compartment. So, it's exactly that moment. Then, the next scene, which seems to come right after this, but it isn't. Because, you know, I even mentioned it in the teaser analysis. It looks like when Ron asks if that was really Harry, Hermione is next to him, but she isn't. When Ron asks that, only he and Harry are in the compartment. We can tell by their different clothes. Ron is wearing a plaid shirt when he talks to Harry. And when Hermione sits down, he's not wearing the plaid shirt. The plaid shirt is there next to Harry. So, they're different moments. But then, Ron asks, right, are you really Harry Potter?
And this scene is exactly like the part in the book. Because, check it out, the excerpt goes like this. Bye, said Harry and Ron. The twins closed the compartment door as they passed. Are you really Harry Potter? Ron blurted out.
Harry nodded, exactly like that. Harry nods. There. Harry doesn't even answer, he just nods. And in the teaser, it's exactly like that. And Ron asking, right, are you really Harry Potter? In the movie, it wasn't like that, right? I know I don't like to keep comparing the series with the movie, because people are doing it in a negative way, not comparing in a fun way, just for curiosity's sake. So I try to avoid making the comparison, you know. Of course, we make comparisons without putting down the movie, right? The movie did its job, did the best it could at the time. And that's it. And the series will do the same. Anyway, but in the movie, it's Harry who introduces himself. I'm Harry. Ron says, I'm Ron Weasley. And Harry, I'm Harry, Harry Potter. So that's how they meet. Here in the series, it's following exactly as it is in the book. And finally, Ron does the explosion, right? The famous explosion that won the hearts of the fans. Most of the fans. Just not the grumpy ones, right, who kept complaining. Some Harry Potter fans are really grumpy. Seriously. There was a group, some content creators, from Latin America, you know? I think they're from Mexico, something like that. I'm not sure if it's Latin America or if they're just Spanish speakers, you know? Like, they could be from other places in the world that speak Spanish, not just Latin America. And then they said, hey, let's do it. We're going to make a video with Ron exploding, you know? Like, kind of like this. How are Harry Potter fans going to greet each other from now on, right? Like, doing this, clearly as a joke. A bunch of people who aren't right in the head. If you get upset over this, you're just not right in the head. A bunch of weirdos. Like,
No, wow, real fans aren't gonna do that because that's made up. It's not in the book.
Man, seriously. I'm out of patience with these people who act like this.
No, but that's it, seriously.
seriously guys, calm down. Really calm down. Anyway, this moment, for me and for a lot of people I saw, was really cute, with Ron doing this.
But it was really created for the series. It's not in the book. So that's it. Those were the scenes and the comparison with the excerpts from the book.
Most of them are really similar, with just a little difference here and there in how the scene is done. And I'm sure someone is going to say,
Yeah, and Snape, isn't he different from, for sure?
someone is going to say, for sure.
And isn't Snape different?
Yes, everyone knows he's different. We don't need to mention in every video that Snape differs from the book. Though for some people, we really do have to say it. Because in the analysis I did of the teaser, a guy commented like this.
Aren't you gonna say anything about Snape?
Like, I haven't already made 2 videos about that, right? I think I still need to make about 14 more anyway. That's it. I hope you liked it. I'm really excited and anxious for the series. I can't wait for it to come out and to get more content like this. Man, there's still going to be an official trailer. There will be poster releases. There's going to be a lot of stuff. It's the 2nd season where we're going to suffer, since there'll barely be any outdoor filming, so almost nothing will leak, right?
But let's keep going strong. And who knows, maybe something will leak here or there to ease our anxiety. Thanks for watching this video this far. I'll see you in the next episode of Calderon Furado. And until then, mischief managed.